introducing the next and last speaker, Rabbi Yehonasan Alpren, I want to mention that the whole thing today was recorded and will be available online immediately when we finish. And in a few days, it will be available again in separate lectures and on a much higher quality, again online on YouTube. And anyone who wants a recording of today available immediately or later on can send an email to 9av Jerusalem, the numeral 9 Av, Tishah B'Av, 9av Jerusalem @gmail.com, and we'll get a link which will connect him to this. And he'll be able to get the recordings immediately today, which would be relevant for people in America. And within a few days, it will be available in a higher quality. And we'd like to thank Eli Cohen for taking care of the logistics from videotips.tv. Rabbi Yehonasan Alpren. 9av Jerusalem @gmail.com. Number 9av Jerusalem @gmail.com. Send the email to there. You'll get an automatic link, and through clicking the link, you'll be able to access the recordings. Rabbi Yehonasan Alpren.
In Avos de Reb Nosson, which is the sequel to Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers, we read of an incident of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. A child had died, and he was sitting shiva. The Talmidim came in to Menachem Ovel to comfort him. The first one was Rabbi Eliezer, and he said, Rebbe, do I have reshus, do I have permission to comfort the Rebbe? He said, what would you like to say? Said Rabbi Eliezer, Adam Harishon, Adam the first, lost a child. Cain, as we know, killed Hevel, and he carried on in life. Therefore, Rebbe, you must also carry on. Rabbi Yochanan answered and said, that doesn't help me at all. Just to note that somebody else had a problem and a difficulty like I did, it doesn't help me. Rabbi Yeshua came in later and then said a similar type of message, but he referred to Eov, Job, who lost a whole family. And he carried on. So Rebbe, you must also carry on in life. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai answered and said, that doesn't help me. Just to hear that somebody else also went through my difficulty, where is the nechama? Where is the comfort? And they all came in. Rabbi Yossi came in and said, Rebbe, can I say words of comfort? And Rabbi Yossi said, well, look at Aaron, he lost 2 sons. And later Reb Shimon came in and said, David also lost a child. And each time Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai pushed them aside and said, where's the nechama? Where's the comfort? That doesn't help me. Just to know that somebody else, it makes it even worse for me, that other people also went through my difficulty. Then Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, the Gaon, the Vilna Gaon, in his commentary said it wasn't, it was Rebbe Elazar ben Aruch, whoever, came in and said, Rebbe, I would like to give you a mashal, a parable, of a king who had a fabulous treasure. And he said to his ministers, to his courtiers, I have to travel. And he selected one minister and said, I want you to look after the treasure for me. And when I come back, please return it complete. Every day he was petrified and nervous, supposing something would go missing and the king would be angry. The king returned and the treasure was complete. The king said, thank you. You looked after my pikadon, my deposit. Said Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, Rebbe, you had a child, and you did your best for the child. You did everything you could for that child. You taught him Torah. You gave him everything he needed to survive and succeed in this world. Rebbe, that's a nechama for you. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai turned around and said, Nichamtoni kederech shebnei Adam menachamim. You've comforted me in the way that a person is comforted in this world. What do we learn from this statement of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? Saying to a mourner or saying to somebody that they have similar difficulties doesn't help. It might even aggravate the pain. What helps is the recognition that a person has a mission. That's, after all, what the Mesilas Yesharim says at the beginning of Mesilas Yesharim, Machoi v'osoi ba'olamai. We have a duty in this world. The nechama, the comfort, comes from recognizing that it was done and completed. And that is what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai meant when he turned around and said, Rebbe Loza, you've helped me. We must ask a question. Why on earth, after 1,946 years, are we still sticking on the ground? Where is the nechama? Avelus passes on. 12 months for a loss. Why are we still sitting here and still grieving, and these awful 3 weeks of gradual progression until you can't even eat, can't even bathe, can't even wear shoes, you can't even say hello? Why? Why is there no nechama for Klal Yisrael? The answer is because we haven't yet completed the tafkid. There is a job to be fulfilled. The Gemara in Yoma explains that the first temple was destroyed because of 3 cardinal sins: Avodah Zarah, Geulah, and Shvichas Domim, idol worshipping, murder, and immorality. The second temple was destroyed because of needless hatred from one to another. The Maharal Miprag, in the Sefer called Netzach Yisrael, Perek Dalet, explains what is the difference between the 2 temples. The first temple was an extension of the life of the Jewish people in the wilderness. There they were, because of their qualities, the Almighty lived with them, v'shachanti b'soichom, amongst them. It was the greatness of the human being. And the extension of that was the first temple, where the Almighty, the presence of the Shekhinah, came and settled there. And that was the tribute of the first temple. Man is distinguished, says the Maharal Miprag, by his neshama, his soul, his thoughts, his ruach, his speech and motivation, and nefesh, his physical existence and activity. Avodah Zarah, idol worshipping, is when the mind is distracted and worships something other than the Almighty. That's why we are obliged to believe with all our heart, ani ma'amin be'emunah shalema, that our thoughts and our heart should be dedicated to the Almighty. That's called the neshama. And therefore, when they worshipped idols, it was an abuse of the soul. Killing somebody takes away their ruach chaim, their life. And therefore, the second quality of man, which is distinction of a ruach chaim, speech, motivation, that was an abuse. The murder, the shvichas domim. Understandably, immorality is an abuse of the body. It's a physical activity which is forbidden. And therefore, they were no longer allowed to have the Shekhinah amongst them. That is the reason why we always find by the first Beis HaMikdash, al tatamu es mikdoshi. Tuma, spiritual uncleanliness, is forbidden anywhere close to the temple site. A kohen who acted on the courtyard had to be scrupulous of any possible impurity, whether physical, of any nature whatsoever, because the temple existed for tahara, for purity. And a body who exercises and acts in an immoral way is no longer pure, it's tumah. And that's why the first temple was destroyed. The second was not necessarily on the same theme, says the Maharal. It was given as an encouragement for the Jewish nation for the long years of exile. In a famous essay by Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, he explains that when they built the second temple, they knew it wouldn't last. That's the reason why they kept the names of Nisan, Iyar, Siv, and Tammuz, and Av. That's the reason why Rav Huna, Rav Ada, all these are Aramean names. Why? Because it was going to stay. We know when they left Mitzrayim, they kept the Lashon Kodesh, the Jewish language. But it was going to stay even after the second temple. That's why there was no ash, no fire came down in the second temple. They actually knew where the ark was, and yet it was hidden away. They couldn't bring it out. Why? Because it wasn't the complete temple, and they knew it would last. It wouldn't last, and there would be a second exile after the destruction of the second temple. So why was it given? The reason why it was given is for Klal Yisrael, as an encouragement for the people. If there is mindless hatred, then you lose the binding factor of the second temple. And therefore, so long as the responsibility of this sinas chinam, of this relationship between people, is broken, then you don't have a nechama, because the task has not been completed. If there is any fraction of damage in Klal Yisrael, it's there. As we know, the Gemara explains, if it's not built in our times, it's as if it's destroyed in our times. And we're still living under the curse of this sinas chinam, of this hatred. Not necessarily hatred, but a dislike, and perhaps a pride and a conceit from one to another. Where's the solution? Where can we pick up the catalyst of change from exile to redemption, from Golus to Geulah? Where can we find it? Perhaps it's all right in front of us and we never noticed it. In the first parsha of Shemos, in Exodus, we learn there domestic scenes which took place amongst all the politics. Moshe came down to Parai, Aaron came down, the work became harder, they built cities of Pithom and Ramses. But in the scene, the Torah HaKadoshah reveals to us domestic scenes which are critical in the change from exile to redemption. As we know, by the end of Shemos already we're into Moshe appearing in front of Parai, and the redemption is on hand. We're told that there were 2 midwives. Why 2? Why not 3? Why not 5? Why not 1? And the names were not given. Shifra and Pua were Yocheved and Miriam. But why were they given the name of Shifra and Pua? Why do we have to know this in the whole cause of change from when they came down to Egypt to when they left? Shifra looked after the physical needs of the child, says Rashi, Meshaperes es Avlad. She cleaned the child. Pua looked after the emotional needs. She cooed the child. She sang to the child. We needed 2 midwives. One the physical needs, and one the emotional needs. We're told, Vatachayena es hayalodim. They spared, they looked after the child. The Medrash brings down fabulous incidents of how they behaved. Shifra and Pua organized charities, Gemach organizations in Goshen where they lived, and ensured that no wife, no woman gave birth to 6 children in one go. No mother had without. They were looked after. Vatachayena, they spared. They encouraged charity in the community. A second commentary is given that they were scared of comments that might be made against them. What happens if a child is born with a blemish, paralyzed, can't see, not properly formed? Supposing we have to cut a limb in order to deliver the child, they'll say that we're working for power. So they prayed tremendously for every birth, that no child should come out with a blemish. They cared. They cared for Klal Yisrael. The next scene is Basia coming down to the water, Miriam standing there at the water. An older sister stood there, L'de'ah, Maye osaloi. What's happening with the child? I care about this child. Why do we have to know that scene of an older sister standing there? What is the Torah telling us for? Echpat la. She cared about her younger brother. Basia, the daughter of Paro, we're told, came down, and she took a look, and the pasuk and the sentence tells us quite clearly, she opened the box and she saw 2 things she saw. And now, boiche, the physical conditions of the child need improvement. He's crying. Vatachmoil olov. She had pity on the child. Same 2 points, physical and emotional. Moshe Rabbeinu, we're told, why do we have to know this? He walked the streets of Mitzrayim, of Egypt. The altar from Kelm, the famous teacher, the Talmud, the student of Yisrael Salant, explained in several different essays that he wrote. Nowhere do we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest tzaddik, the greatest Talmud Chochem. Nowhere does it tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu was in any way exceeded anybody else in Mitzrayim. But one thing we know, Vayetze el Echov Vayabesiv Loisam, he went out of the palace and he walked the streets of Cairo and he cried. He could not take it. He saw an old woman with a heavy bag and he switched it with a young boy. He walked the streets and he nosan einov v'liboy. He put his eyes and his heart to see what was happening. He cared. The catalyst of change was the care of the midwives, the care of Basia, the care of Miriam, the caring of Moshe Rabbeinu. If we're allowed to say such a thing, Ani lo yodea, of even the Almighty, it says, Vayomer Hashem, Ra'oi ra'isi, I've seen what they're going through. The Tza'akosom Shomati, I heard their cry. They are physically in need and emotionally in need of support. Again, Moses at the bush, when he's standing there at the bush, and every time we come to this parsha in the Torah, I always have an enormous problem. How can you turn around to the Almighty and say no? You say, no, I'm not going. Go down. No, I'm not going. How can you say no? The answer is because he had an older brother, and it's not right. He's been there for 80 years. Mi'ani u'mo'ani, that I should go down and take my older brother's place. And we're told that once Aaron heard, again the two same points. Vayar v'roacha, he'll see you, v'samach b'liboy, and he'll be happy in his heart. The same 2 points. The catalyst of change in all these domestic scenes is the same theme. The change did not take place because of the negotiations of Parai with Moshe Rabbeinu. The change did not come to effect because we had a clever diplomat who was chasing backwards and forwards, if you'll excuse me, from New York to Tel Aviv, running backwards and forwards and asking, please, please. It doesn't happen that way. The first Geulah took effect because domestically there was a tremendous amount of caring going on. Take a look at the last scene of exile in Klal Yisrael. The last nevuah in all of Klal Yisrael, in the Jewish nation, is the prophet Malachi. And then we're told about the Mashiach is about to come, but the Navi gives, and these are the last words of nevuah, a prophecy in the Bible. We are told as follows, that when they came back from Babylon, the Navi, the prophet Malachi, warned them and told them, the Almighty will not accept your sacrifices and is upset with you for one reason, that you brought along non-Jewish wives. That's not the way. You should not have brought them back with you. The words are, Asher ohev ubal bas el necha. What are you doing with these wives? Believe it or not, they answered the prophet back and they said to him, Abraham took Hagar, Jacob took Bilhah and Zilpah. So what's wrong in taking another wife? And the Navi turned around and said, there was a reason. Abraham was given Hagar by Sarah, his wife. Jacob was given Bilhah and Zilpah. There was a reason for this. But you, it's much worse. It's not the fact that you married the reason why you're not favorable. And listen to these words. Ki Hashem heyid beinecha ubein eshes ne'urecha. Your crime, your offense, is between you and your first wife. Asher ata bogadat bo. You despised her. Vehi chaverecha chabertecha ve'eshes brisecha. Your Jewish wife is number 2, and the non-Jewish wife is number 1. That's a begida. That's a betrayal. Next words. Hine pisam yovar el hechaloi. The Messiah will come for one reason. Next words in the Navi. V'orva l'Hashem Minchas Yehuda b'Yushalayim ki me'olam uchashanim kadmoniyos. I'll translate. All on the same theme. You have another wife, your young wife, your Jewish wife, your first wife, Eishes Ne'urecha, who you cared for, who you married first. She's number one, and you put her number two. Says the Pasuk, what's sweet to the Almighty is the gift of Judah in Jerusalem, like the days of old and the years gone by in the first temple. I once heard a commentary, magnificent commentary on this verse. If you've noticed and detected, this is the line we say every time we finish Shemona Esrei, the 18 brachas. When we finish, the last words are this verse. V'orov al Hashem, what is sweet to the Almighty, is the gift of Judah. Rav Nevensal once explained as follows. The word orev has another meaning. It's a guarantor, a person who gives a pledge. Judah came forward when Benjamin, was in Egypt. And there was a massive tragedy because Reuven had come forward and said, I'll give my children. And Yaakov said, no way, how does it help me? Your children are my children. When Yehuda came and said, Anochi Aravenu, mi'odi tavaksheno, those children are my children. What happens to Binyamin is my child. Once he said that, Yaakov said, then go down and you'll be successful. What's pleasing to the Almighty is the guarantee of the gift of Yehuda, that he pledged, that child is my child. What happens to that child is my responsibility. That caring is what happened, and the reason why we were zeicha that 2,500 missiles should miss. For one simple reason. Because we stood there as a nation and said, Ribono Shel Olam, those 3 boys are our boys. They're our children. There's no way we'll let them go. That was the reason why. It's the catalyst of redemption. To turn around and say, I don't care what politics is. I don't care whether he's a Sephardi, whether he's a Hasidisha, whether he's a Chabad, whatever he is. He's my child, and I care. And we stood together when Shimon Gross, his 2 children were gassed. And we stood there as a nation and we said, Ribono Shel Olam, that's my child, and pray for the child. I have a friend whose son lives in Bnei Brak. He said when Rav Steinman had said that everyone on Parshas Korach should be Mekabel Shabbos an hour earlier, he went to Geulah Chazon Ish to sit and learn. About 6 o'clock on Friday evening. He said there was no seat available. The place was packed. At 6:15, Geulah Chazon Ish, which is a Haredi stronghold in the literature world, davened and prayed for 3 Mizrahi boys in Gush. They cared. We cut away the barriers. In Brisk, there's something called Chalois Gavro and Chalois Chefzo. There's something called a personal human connection and an objective connection. The difference is as follows, and this is where we fail, and this is where our caring collapses. We don't understand that a person is not a shitta, is not a policy, is not a criterion. It's a human being and it's a Jew. And that criterion is missing by us. We confuse the issue. If someone doesn't eat Badatz Hersha, if someone davens with a Kippas Sulga, if someone sends his son to the army, we confuse the issue. The caring is missing. That is what the responsibility is, what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai meant. We are responsible to show caring. We showed it by the 3 boys. We showed it by Gross. We showed it for the soldiers, Aleinu, who all Kedoshim, who died. The caring, the ichpatiyut. It was the catalyst in Egypt. It will be the catalyst, according to Malachi, in the final redemption. The change will not come because we spent maybe 8 minutes over Shemona Esrei instead of 6 minutes. The change will not come if we finish the daf or we don't. These are all important issues. But that's not the catalyst. The catalyst in Egypt was the caring. The catalyst by the Geulah Shlema is the caring. That's what the Navi says, your Eishes Na'urim, your young wife. Esther in Shushan is the same. When she wrote to the Sanhedrin and told them, write me down, Divrei Tzoymas v'Zar Kosam, matters of fasting and crying, what was behind the crying? What was behind the fasting? The first time Esther appeared in front of the king after 3 days fasting, he turned around and said to Esther, what do you want? She turned, I don't want anything, just come tomorrow. I'm making a banquet tomorrow. And then the second time he asked her at the first banquet, what do you want, Esther? I want you to come the next day to another banquet. Eventually he turned around and said to her 3 times, Esther, ma bakosha seich ad chatzi hamalchus, and he was a world leader. He controlled the world. And therefore half the world would go to Esther if she just says what she wants. And the lady turned around and said, no, I have one request. And this is what's behind all the prayer and the fasting. Nafshi b'shelosi v'ami babakoshosi. I'm asking for my people. And that's why a potential Auschwitz flipped over and became the happiest day in the calendar. It should have been a final solution, and it switched because the lady cared, and Mordechai cared, and they showed unbelievable ichpatiyut. He made rallies around the world, Mordechai, that people should pray for them. Why? Because he cared. That's the cause of that's the catalyst. We see it in the first Geulah, and we see it in the last Geulah. That's the reason why the great Rabbi Yehonasan ben Zakkai, he saw it all in front of him, the Churban Abayis, the destruction of the temple. He turned around and said to the Talmidim, the students, Sa'u ura'u ezu derech yishar, which is the correct way that you should conduct yourself? They all turned around and said, one said, a good heart, a good eye. Another said, be a good neighbor. And they all gave different answers until this last one who had given the right words of comfort when he was sitting Shiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, turned around and said, Rebbe, a leiv toiv. Said Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, said Rabbi Yehonasan ben Zakkai, that's what you need. When you go out into exile, because he took them into Yavne, when you leave Yerushalayim, what characteristic and personality do you need to survive and succeed the long years of exile? You need a good heart. That's primary. That's how Jews survived in Poland. That's how they survived in Lithuania. That's how they survived today in North America. It's the leiv toiv which is the catalyst. I have a son in Lakewood, New Jersey. When all this was going on with the 3 boys, I asked my son, what's happening in Lakewood? And he said to me, Abba, that's on there. Every shul I've been to, a shtibel, a yeshiva, wherever it is, after davening, no one leaves. We say 3 chapters of Psalms, and we scream them out, and then say, Achenu. No one moves without saying the 3 chapters of Tehillim. That's in North America, thousands of miles away. That caring provided the miracles of the missiles. There's no question, where did it come from? The miracles have a cause. In heaven, they saw the caring of the people, and that's why we were redeemed from a potential massacre of 2,500 missiles. The miracles which took effect are all on this basis. A friend told me that his son was in Gaza. He was inside a building, and 8 of them had to separate into different rooms. 2 chayalim, 2 soldiers, were in a large room, each watching a window, with the snipers and waiting for guns, waiting to what happened. And the whole building was taken over by the Israeli soldiers, and one was in one corner of the room and one was in the other. There was a quiet time, so one of the soldiers by the window took his pack off his back and took out a care package that he'd been given on the way down to Gaza. He opened up the package, and there, the package was cookies and cakes, which were given by a little boy in Jerusalem whose name was Shmuli. It said, Lichvod HaChayal, dear soldier, please enjoy, I'll translate the words, please enjoy these cookies and cakes which I made for you. But I ask you one thing, before you eat the cookies, please say a bracha, a blessing. He called out to Moshe on the other side of the room. He was a Chiloni, he was an irreligious soldier. I have a beautiful package here with cookies from a little boy in Jerusalem. But he asked me to say a blessing. What do I say? Moshe, who was with a kippah, who was Shomer Torah, who kept mitzvahs, walked over to the other side of the room to teach him how to make a boire minei mezainos. When he was teaching him the bracha, the whole window blew up with a bomb where he would have been if he wouldn't have walked over to teach the boy the bracha, the blessing. These are not, it's all based on the same theme. Shmuli sent the cookies. The soldier helped him with the bracha. That caring is the seed of the Geulah. If we do that, we can come back to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and understand what he meant. What's the derech? What's the way that a person is comforted? When you had a mission and then you fulfilled the mission, then you can receive a nechama. I'm suggesting that this is the cause of why we're still sitting on the floor nearly 2,000 years later, because this responsibility has not been taken care of. To our credit, we've shown it at different times this year. If you can come forward more, this caring, this interest, this awareness of another Jew, then we'll be Zoicha like in Mitzrayim to receive the Tzeisim in Mitzrayim. So the whole kinna will change. But Tzeisim Yerushalayim, B'shuvi Yerushalayim, there are the seeds, there's the catalyst. If you can do this, then all this whole day will disappear from the calendar, and it'll turn from a final solution into something like a Purim masquerade. B'mheira v'yomeinu, Amen.